Hello, welcome to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. Today we continue the story of Samuel Smadja. He is the founder and CEO of Sarel, one of the largest tour operators in Israel. Born into a Messianic Jewish family, from a young age Samuel was taught by his father about the biblical prophecies concerning Israel. But first, I asked him what makes Sarel's tours unique.
The thing that I try all the time is to make connections, not just to walk and see where Jesus walked, which is important and very valid. My heart is to connect believers also with the living stones in Israel, both the Jews and the Arabs in the land. To bring lectures, round tables, to do worship evenings and different lectures with different pastors, leaders, and going a few levels deeper than just to walk and touch the places and take a picture where Yeshua, where Jesus walked. I want people to be equipped by the fact that they see how deep their faith is. I want them to go back with a special hunger for the Word of God. I believe when after a tour with Sarel, people go home and they say, wow, there's so much about my faith that I didn't know. I better go back and read my Bible and dive deeper than just go on Sunday to church. If we succeed to encourage them to go back to the Word and dig deeper, I achieved my goal. And second of all, for me, it's very important that people are going to pray for this part of the world. I believe that the Bible tells us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I believe that it's way more than just a political peace between Jews and Arabs. I believe it's a peace between the people of Israel, the people of Jerusalem, and the God of Israel. I believe that's to pray for the salvation of Israel. So my heart is then when people go back home, that I gave them enough tools to understand a bit more the situation in Israel and to understand the need to pray for this part of the world.
It's very interesting that you're having people coming from Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Far East, as you say, but that the European market to Israel has dropped off. Now, here in the UK, I would imagine many people will say, well, Israel, why should I bother with Israel? But yet you're saying, well, it's not just important to go to Israel, it's also important to meet the believers who live there. How have you noticed that has impacted people meeting Arab and Jewish believers when they visit Israel?
I'll tell you, because when you're on a bus, you have the guide, okay? Now, depending on the political views of your guide or the religious views of your guide, you get one perspective. When you have meetings with Arab believers and Jewish believers and Orthodox Jews, and there is a lot of time for question and answer, and you're getting a different approach. You see, I don't want people to go back Zionism. I want people to go back loving the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, and his Messiah. And I believe if they fall in love with God, they will fall in love with what's important to God. So when they sit in different lecture and they meet different people and they ask questions, they can agree, disagree. It's okay. I'm not here to change their political view. That's not my goal. I just want to put more light on the Word of God and that they hear a different approach and that they will go back home and they'll understand, wow, the problem is bigger than what we thought. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict is huge. The fight on the holy places is huge. But one thing for sure, something is miraculously right in this place that God brought them back home. How it's going to all pan out, I don't have an answer. And that's why I have to pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
I want to talk to you about the congregation because your father was a challenging man by the sound of it. He was wise, but he certainly challenged you. And as you say, he founded the congregation that after he died, you felt you should take on that mantle. So tell me about the congregation. Who goes there? What happens?
I have to say that I didn't feel that I have to take, or maybe I did, but there was a board. There was a board of elders, and we met together, and I said to the elders, one of you should take over because I'm busy. None of them was willing to take it. And deep in my heart, I wanted to do it, but I was not sure that I'll be able. And I said, God, if you really want me to do it, if somebody else of the elders will say, I'll take it, I know it's not from you. And none of them wanted the position. And I say, okay, so I'll do it. And this is the thing that I enjoy the most at the moment. During the COVID, we went to online.
Mm-hmm.
The congregation was very small, was around Israelis. We have guests all the time, but we were between 60 to 80 Israelis. On the weekend, we were like up to 150, but we had many guests because it's really in the center of town. It's very known, so we have always visitors. And because of persecution throughout the years, we never allowed people to take pictures, in the congregation. And it's funny that because of COVID, now we're online on YouTube in Hebrew. And I thought we will have 20, 30 people watching. And by the grace of God, we have between 300 to 500 people every weekend watching.
Wow.
So I can tell you that that's why I say COVID is an opportunity.
So if I was to ask you generally, Samuel, about what you believe God is doing in Israel at this time, what are you expecting to see happening there in the next 5 years, say?
First of all, I think spiritually, that I think in the next 10 years, we'll see more believers receiving Yeshua than in the last 70 years. Because the Israelis are open. I think COVID showed everyone that nobody has control on anything. And COVID also showed that there's a stronger power than you think you ever had. And people got to the conclusion that their money, their businesses, anything they had did not help them during COVID. So I think there is much more, I think in Israel, but probably all over the world, people are searching. And that's why we see so many people coming to our YouTube channel. I'm very excited about what God is going to do spiritually in Israel. On the political side, that's a bit more challenging. There was election in America. Before the election in America, I'm sure your audience heard about Trump's plans for the Middle East, which started. I believe that although Trump is not the president, I believe that this thing has started rolling, and we see that Israel is doing peace agreements with different countries in the region, and I believe that will only grow. And I believe that there'll be a prosperity and that the Palestinians won't have a choice but to join. I don't know how, I have no idea, but the powers in the Middle East are changing very rapidly. If Saudi Arabia join what Bahrain and the United Emirates did and join into an agreement, a kind of agreement with Israel, I think the Palestinian Authority won't have a choice but will have to sit with Israel and find terms, not according to their terms, but according to reality. I believe the region will be changing very fast. Yeah, that's my opinion. I think the biggest issue in the Middle East today is not the Palestinian-Israeli problem, is the Iranian issue. And that's the factor also that unites countries like Bahrain, Emirates, Morocco. All the Sunni countries are coming and uniting with Israel because we all have a common enemy. And in the Middle East, if you have a common enemy, it's stronger than peace. For many years, Israel was the common enemy. Today, the Gulf countries understand that they need Israeli technology and Israeli intelligence in order to prevent Iran to do something crazy. So they're all joining. I believe the Middle East is still continue to is going to continue. It's going to be a different Middle East in 5 years.
Meanwhile, you would encourage people to come to Israel, and I just want to mention again your Sarel Academy. You mentioned that that's on YouTube. Maybe just a word more about that.
Yeah, my concern with Sarel is how do I encourage young pastors pastor in the age of 35 to 45, 50. You see, the older generation loved Israel. They were around with 1967. They saw the return of the Jewish people. They saw 1965 as a fulfillment of prophecy and so on. And they would come to Israel and so on and so on. The younger generation, I'm not criticizing, are more into world evangelism, Muslim evangelism, which is all very important and very true. But Israel is in number 7 or number 10 in their priority. Every young pastor will tell you evangelism, worship, building the churches, building buildings, building parking lots, and so on. And Israel, and beside that, I've never been to Israel. I don't really know. I'm not so, end time prophecy is not the big thing in most churches and so on. So I say, okay, I need to create a tool for young pastors to help them to prepare before they come to the land. Because I believe that the tour to Israel is a combination of the Israeli guide and the spiritual leader, which is usually the pastors. So I created the Sarel Academy in order to help pastors to prepare to come to Israel. And then I decided to just open it for everybody. Mm-hmm. So we have like 52 sites that people can see with explanation, with written explanation, on video also. So if the guy, whoever leads the tour can go see and prepare himself, or if you could just come to Israel and you want to do some homework before you come, you can get a very good idea on what you're going to see and what's what. So that was the purpose of Sarel Academy.
You've been listening to Samuel Smadja sharing his story and his vision for sar-el tours in Israel. The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please visit our website, olivetreefund.org. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.